Hey guys, what's up? It's Johnny Marksman here, and today I'm going to be breaking down my track This Time, which is out on my label Elevation London right now. Yeah, let's just dive straight into it. So we'll start off with the instrumental components of things. So let's just go with the drums. Got a kick, nice and thumpy. What I typically do is I make sure that the kicks are shortened quite a bit for a tight, punchy kick. So I typically use drum rack, but you can use simpler. It's basically the same thing. And I've added a fade out here. And what this means as well is because that we're using a rolling bass line, it's going to allow space for the bass, but also have a punchy kick, right? There's then a little bit of drum bus going on, which is just adding a bit of drive and crunch. Just to really emphasize the click a little bit. And then I did a bit of EQing here to remove this weird, sort of annoying frequency I didn't particularly like. That's basically it on the kick. A lot of the magic happens on the groove bus. Let's take a look at some of the other sounds. So I have a drum rack here, which has some programmed drums. So we have a snare, which is consisting of 4 layers. So 2 timbrel layers layered in the middle, which are providing the main timbre of the sound, which sound like this. And the second one here, but layered together. So one's brighter, one's more of like a deeper sort of wood block sound, I would say. And then we have these 2 snares panned left and right at the same volume, at the same amount, not volume. So 26 left, 26 right, to give it a bit more additional width, which sound like these. I'm actually just going to turn the kick off for a second. But let's add those back in, and without these, if I turn these off at the same time, listen to how much that opens up the clap. So yeah, that's basically it. Let's keep the kick in just to give context. We also have some hats as well, which also have multiple layers, of course, which sound like this. So you have like this main shaker component here, which like on the main offbeat, and then this is adding an accent. And I added a vocoder on this just to make it a little bit more noisy and bright. We also have that same thing where we have 2 other hats panned this one time hard left and hard right. More stereo information on the hats. Is, yeah, classic technique I use. There's also some bongos. And these are panned slightly to the left, slightly to the right. There's a central balance. This is an important concept. So whatever I'm panning to the left, I'm also panning the exact same amount to the right. So they balance to the center. It just helps the groove fill out a little bit more. I don't know if there's any other sounds in this rack. I think it's just all these. Yeah. So those are the programmed drums I had, and then I had some top loops as well, which are just sort of filling out the textures in the back. So there's this. So this sound here is quite cool. It's just basically run through, the vocoder is not actually doing anything, but this got a spectral resonator on, which is tuned to the key of the track, which is E flat minor or D sharp minor, and harmonically equivalent. It's weird saying D sharp. If you're classically trained, so I call it E flat. But yeah, there's most of this is going to the spectral resonator. But if you listen, this sound here, like sort of MIDI gritty layer, but with this spectral resonator, kind of that weird sort of flanging kind of tonal texture, but it's still got a bit of that mid percussive crunch to it. It's about 67% wet. There's also some additional top loops here, so it's more like a sort of 16th shaker with a clap to support the other clap. It's quite low in the mix compared to the rest of the drums. There's this here, which is quite a loud component in the mix, and this has a beat repeat on, which every also into like just before the fourth bar happens, you have a 32 note roll, so you can hear. You have the which is quite a cool little technique. You can use to spice up loops. I have this top loop here, which is again just a. There's a lot of top loops here. This is an old project, so I don't know how many of these things are actually necessary anymore. But this is an additional top loop to support the hats and clap. Again, quite low in the mix. And then this one here. Just like a bit more of like the upper mid-level crunch in the texture. So all the top loops together sound like this. And the rest of the groove. The kick. So very punchy. Now, a lot of this comes from my drum rack, which, by the way, you can get for free in my school community. This is, of course, being posted in the school community, but it's in the kick and bass mastery training, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, like, you can just drag and drop this rack on. I've made it with Ableton stock stuff as well, so you don't necessarily need the third-party stuff here anymore. But yeah, this has a bit of blue compression just to keep the transients intact with a slow attack and then a very quick release, just so it just enhances the punch of the drums. Cutting out the lows that we don't need. It then goes through this Titan rack here, which is like makes them a little bit more aggressive and crunchy and adds a little bit of reverb on. There's like a little bit of clipping that takes place as well, just to like make it a little bit more consistent. And some of the really loud notes, it just chops them off. With drums, you've got to be careful with clipping, because if you clip off too much of it, you're going to lose all the punch and the transients. And then this is just sidechain to the kick. Here you can see I only have this super low band and this low mid band really doing anything. This band is not doing anything. Just to make sure the kick is cutting through everything. And on my drum bus, finally, we have another rack, which you can get with stock Ableton stuff as well, which basically, if I turn this off and on, how much punch and flavor that brings. So this here is giving it a low and high end boost. The compressor is just a compressor. Again, generally when sounds come together, you want to compress them a little bit. The squash is a really aggressive compressor, and then there's a tiny little bit of room reverb. So all of the drums feel like they're in the same space, but there's not too much reverb. You have some parallel compression here, which you might hear, like I've probably shown this a few times. I do this on every single track, but this is like a really aggressively compressed signal, which doesn't sound great, but just a tiny little bit of that mixed in adds quite a lot of thickness to the drums, which is quite nice. I then have some additional compression here from the API 2500 bus compressor. Just again, low attack, fast release, just to allow that kick to pop through. Generally with compressors, like particularly ones with needles, like this is really general by the way, but especially for drums, you want to make sure that the needle is all the way back before the next main hit. So the kick is the loudest element, which is triggering this the most, so I kind of want to make sure this is back when the next kick hits. So it dances in time with the track, basically. I then have some really aggressive, so this isn't actually in the rack, I added this in later, but I have some distortion here using raw. I have both multiband mode and mid-side mode. So the multiband mode, this is, again, this is like a really, really aggressive if you go fully wet. So I just dialed it back to about 34%. So it's a bit more subtle. And then I have some mid-side distortion, which is mostly focused on the sides here, which is going to like really emphasize those side sounds and have a nice crunch on the super wide elements. So without this, you can hear like that's just mostly the hats and what have you. But like without this distortion together, that just really thickens it up. Then there's a tiny little bit of clipping here just to put off some of the really aggressive peaks, but not like anything too crazy. And a bit of EQing, remove some of the muddiness around 500 or so, and take a little bit of the bite out of the clap, which was a little bit aggressive. And yeah, there you go, drums. Now, let's move on. So we have the bass here. So there's actually two basses, but they come from the same source. So in like the breakdown of the track where the vocals come in, properly for like the first time, we have like a long glidey bass, which sounds like this, which is pretty cool. And I believe I automated the glide time. Here you go. So certain notes I wanted to glide, certain notes I wanted to be less emphasized. So this jump here was quite big, so I wanted it to be like wow. Then back down is a bit less. And then if we keep going, this one. So yeah, pretty cool. And I'm of course like doing automation. I'm like opening up the filter, and actually closing off a filter here. So there's a high pass and a low pass. The high pass starts off like, so the bass is a bit more thin, and as you go towards the drop, you're bringing back in more of the sub, so it feels like it's getting fuller, but also fatter and brighter with the low pass filter also automating in, right? And also on the synth itself, I'm opening up the filter cutoff, which is done by this mod wheel, and also making it more detuned. So over here, right and wider here, wide. Right, with the drums, like we've got a rolling bass, which is playing a chord progression. It's basically fairly straightforward. I've just split the sub component here, and this is like below 150 hertz or so, and then on this bass here, I have the same sort of 150, and it's just playing like the main component of the bass. But also this mod wheel is opening up the filter cutoff and not doing that on the bass, okay? But I believe it is the same sound. I swap this out to something. Yeah, it is a very similar sound. This one is just a saw wave, and this one has saw wave and this other MB saw in here. So it's similar, but not quite the same. But yeah, sounds like this. Playing a chord progression, which if we fold these and put it in scale mode, this is that it goes 1, 1, 5, 3, 4, 1, 5, 7, 4. So it's an 8-bar chord progression. It's similar for the first two notes, but then it changes this note here for a little bit of variation. You'll hear like filters opening up here as we open up the mod wheel. It's going to get brighter, bigger, and fatter. Go over here. Oh, I totally even forgot to tell you, there was a drum fill in that I actually recorded these live. So this is me playing the drums. This is real drum kit. And it's got a bit of processing on, just taking out the super lows. It's got a pretty aggressive multi-band dynamics going on here, which is just taming a bit of the highs and the lows, and the mids. And I've used this rack again to like tighten it up. So it's not really as punchy as you would like in a, I guess, melodic, progressive techno house track. I don't even know what genre this is, to be honest with you, but it's not punchy enough is the point. So this just tightens it up a whole lot more. Adds a bit of reverb as well. And yeah, just again, that's going to introduce some lows and highs because of this dirt knob, which adds noise. So I cut those out and made them a little bit less bright. yeah, real drum fill. Totally forgot about that while we were talking about the bass. Yeah, let's just talk quickly about the bass. So all the magic happens on this group here, where, let me just loop this section. There we go. All the magic's happening on the group. So it's being compressed slightly with the solid bus compressor. Because it's a stabby sound, I want to enhance the transient. So again, same with drums. A slow attack, pretty fast release. Not doing a ton of compression. Then there's an EQ here just to take out some of the muddiness here. And it's pretty muddy. That just tightens it up. And I'm taking off the super subs that you don't need. Then this goes through some distortion. Again, only about 36% wetness, but I like using the multi-band mode because this gives you a lot of control over how each of those bands are distorted. Then this is post distortion EQ. So this one I was again cutting out some of the muddiness, cutting out some of this sort of slap sound that you get around 2K, which sounds like this. Yeah, that kind of like, which isn't really nice. You get quite a lot on rolling basses. Then that's essentially it. This is some arrangement automation. There's a slight amount of ducking, so the lows are being ducked more than the highs. Just gives it a bit more movement, right? And that's basically it. It's then running through my bass bus, which no compression this time. It's Gullfoss, which adds a bit of clarity. Then I added a bit of boost around 150, a bit more warmth. Again, cut out more of these mids. There was a big build up. Of these lower mids, and I want it to be a bit more heavier in the sub. Then clipped it to make it super consistent. This is quite aggressive clipping here. That's 6.5 dB of clipping. A little bit more EQ. And multi-band sidechain, which I've doubled up for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. Old project, sometimes you find some weird shit in there, right? Anywho, so yeah, let's get into the rest of the instruments. So there are also these growls, which sound like this. So there's two layers. There's like a lower one. There's a diva patch. I actually have the effects on, which is usually not what I do these days. It's an old project. But yeah, it's just like a kind of squarey patch. So it sounds quite sort of interesting. Got a little bit of attack on it. And of course, I'm automating the filter cutoff of the filter over time. There's a bit of distortion, just taking out the super subs because I don't want that coming from this sound. I want the bass having that sound. And then there's a second layer as well here. It's a bit brighter, higher up in the register. Now on the growl layers, we have a bit of OTT, which is something I rarely use, but hey ho, make them a bit more crazy and nasty. There's a lot of distortion, as you can see. There's distortion box and raw. We're cutting out some of these super bright frequencies up here to make them a little bit darker. There's some chorus from choral, which I really rarely use ever, so it's weird to see that in there. Phase mistress, which is something I also don't really use that often, just to make them a bit more stereo and weird. So let's just solo them. Makes them a lot more wider, more interesting. And then we have Gullfoss as well, which is adding quite a bit of clarity. And we have some echo and reverb, which is being sidechained. So you can hear the, there's a 4/4 note delay and a 6/16 delay. So that would be a 3/8 delay. But it's kind of getting in the way, so I want this kind of pulsing motion taking place in the delay. That's why there's the compressor there. And then there's also a big reverb. That's not really that big, actually. It's quite a short one, just being sidechained to itself. And that's basically it. Something I should say as well is that this is also sidechained to the bass. So we have quite an aggressive sidechain that I'm using with full boss. So every time the bass hits, these get out of the way slightly. You might hear, like, as I bypass that, it prioritizes the bass a little bit more. Yeah, there's a lot of sidechaining taking place. These growls are also sidechained to the vocals as well, because they're quite full spectrum, and this ARP, which we'll talk about right now. So we have this ARP here, which is playing like a interesting pattern. There's like a little melody taking place here. So these are generally following the chord progression. So those are like the 1st and 5th degrees of the scale for the chords. And then the top part of the ARP, so that it's playing 3 notes at a time, is playing a little descending melody. So there's a little variation that time. So play when it's not filtering in. Just following the chord progression with these notes. Then this is playing a constant note. And a little variation here. Yeah, quite interesting. And we have, I normally actually sequence in the notes manually because you have a bit more control, but I use an arpeggiator this time for some reason. This actually came from the Mini V3, which I don't really use that often, but there was a nice sort of squarey, pulse wavy sound, which I really liked, and I'm playing with the filter cutoff and the decay throughout the arrangement. Like here, you can hear it get really big and crazy here, compared to over here where it's super tight. So yeah, that's something I play with over the course of the track. Of course, there's a lot of distortion, as you can see. I mean, it's like a lot of the same things over and over again. We have like raw distortion box at not 100% wet, because raw can be very, very aggressive, and I've already distorted it as well. I just wanted 2 types of distortion. Using some EQ, I cut out the 800-ish, so 700-ish, 800 hertz. That kind of tends to build up a lot in my tracks, so I got rid of that. A little bit of additional noise added in using this rack, and a tiny bit of delay as well, but it's quite just up front. So the more delay we're adding is going to push it further back into the mix. So it's just got a little bit of delay to give it a bit of background, but most of the depth is coming from this reverb here. So and I've actually EQ'd this reverb so it's a little bit more pushed back, because I want this ARP to be really, really up front, which I would say it is. It's then sidechained to the main lead. Sidechained to the main lead, and there's a bit of additional EQing taking place here as well. Is cool. And yeah, just some more sidechaining to the kick. That's essentially it. Let's take a look at this lead sound. So there's a couple of cool things about this. We actually have probably better to show you in the extended version over here, but we have like this resampled audio layer of it, which comes in, but it's probably better to show you the actual lead sound first. So here, got playing a pretty cool pattern. just like looping over again. But very, very interesting sound. And it's a serum patch from Audio Tent. And not really much automation is taking place on this, just because it's such a cool sound. And it's not really like the main focus of the track. It's more like a B part for vocals. So when the vocals aren't playing, this is playing. Because you can't really have two lead components at the same time. A bit of compression on it, just make it like more consistent. Very, very subtle, you know, just only doing a little bit of 3 dB of gain reduction, barely anything. Lots of distortion, as you can see, like without the distortion. Like night and day, right? The raw is doing both multiband and mid-side to enhance the sides. Here's where things got a little bit crazy, and I can't really remember why I did some of this stuff, but we have micro shift to give it more stereo width. Just very subtly give it more stereo width. And had this rack here, which was just adding like a nice reverb to it. And this is like a really unorthodox order I processing this in, because this is an old project, so I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. But then when I was trying to redesign it and redo it like years later, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to roll with it, because that actually added quite a lot to the sound. But normally I wouldn't have my reverb there to then add more reverb later. I'm adding a little bit of noise, and this washout dial is just like to have it disappear into the mix and the arrangement, like here. Really pushed back. A little bit of EQ, removing some of around 2K because it gets a bit present there. And then just EQ and reverb, like again, very similar things taking place. The echo here is on quarter notes, and the reverb here is like quite a pretty long reverb here, like 5 seconds. That's essentially it on the lead. Like, it is actually sidechained to the ARP, because the ARP was getting a little bit lost when the lead was playing. I take this off. Helps the ARP pop through a little bit more. But yeah, what I did was I also resampled the lead. If I take this auto filter off, so this is just in audio, but this is like reversed parts of the lead, so it's like stretched out and reversed, and then running through some like 100% wet reverb and echo. So just really weird smeared out in the background. Like you'll probably be able to hear it if I play it in context of the mix here. I'll take the vocals off, but I take the auto filter off. It's basically adding a really nice texture and ambience. So often using the sounds from your project is the best way to create effects and ambiences, because, you know, this came from the lead. It sounds at home and makes sense, and is an interesting way of like actually introducing the lead, like rather than throwing in like another completely random texture from a sample pack. This is from this track, so it's going to feel at home and feel a lot more cohesive. We've got some pad textures as well, so there's like this vocal ambience, which I believe is just like an Ableton stock sound, which if I take the filter off, sounds like this. I'll just take off all the effects, actually. Like a really simple sound. And that just set the kind of canvas of the track. It's got a bit of echo, bit of reverb on, and just really sort of low mid focused. Then of course this is like filtering it over time. That's basically it. There's a second pad layer, which is just following the chord progression here. It's like a Juno patch, a really sort of spacey, trippy sound, which is really nice. And then there's a second layer, which I believe is the exact same patch from Juno. I take the filter off. here on both of them. It's just playing a harmony. I think it's just playing the 5th note. So it's playing like power chords between them. With the pad. You have this lead texture here. A really, really cool ambience texture for this track. All together without the vocals. Yeah. Now let's talk about the vocals. So this could be like a whole freaking video on its own, but like there's a lot going on here. Of course, Hex and Solstice are two brothers. Jamie and Joshy. Don't know if you've seen the Rick and Morty sketch. Anyway, Jamie and Joshy, like, so they both have vocal parts. So you can see, if you look closely here, there's like one's Jamie, one's Joshy. So Jamie's got like, I think he has the lead layer, I believe.
But this time I will ride.
That's the Jamie part. And there's a higher part where Joshy's singing a falsetto.
This time I will ride.
And then there's a harmony here.
This time I will ride.
So altogether, these are like the lead vocals.
This time I will rise. Start over again.
So you've got like those 3 layers. So I guess you could say Jamie's voice here is the lead, main lead, and then Joshy's providing the harmonies. But they're all kind of just merged into one sort of layer. Let me tell you, it was a ball ache aligning all of these things. Thank God there's a plugin to do that. Now, something which I've done, which is a little bit unorthodox, is some people tend to actually like use delay channels for this, but maybe I should. But what I've done actually is I have an echo lead, so you can see like certain parts of the main lead are muted, and then certain parts of the echo lead are muted. But together they create the full vocal. So this echo lead here,
This time.
it has like a half note delay, and it side chains to the main lead here. And I've actually automated the the feedback of this delay. And the reason for this was because I felt I had more control of doing this over Ascend. But for example here, like during the verse section here, so this is like during the breakdown, I wanted there to be like a big echo to fill out the space. So for example, check this out. So together you have these.
I've been stuck in my head, running circles way too long. Tired of
So basically you only have the way too long being echoed. You could send it to Ascend, yeah, sure, that's probably a more efficient way of doing it, but I made my bed in this track and I will sleep in it. And then, yeah, this is just sidechain hard, so it's just like filling out the space, so.
thinking, tired of trying to change my way.
And then it gets sidechained super hard when the next one comes in. So you'll see like some of the stems only have one part, like he only did the woe in that part. But yeah, that's essentially it. Like, we'll talk about the vocal writing shortly, but then there are some other layers. There's just some like reverse vocal things here. Like, so this is to introduce the vocals. Reverse vocal coming in.
I've been stuck in my head.
So that's just a reverse of I've, the first syllable he says. And it's just going to lead into that and create that big sense of anticipation for when that does take place. Classic trick they use. There's also some like backing vocals here, which are just fill out the spaces.
Way too long.
So yeah, just filling out the spaces in the gaps.
Change my way.
So yeah, there's obviously not that many spaces during this track because it's quite a busy vocal top line. But then there are also some like random ad-libs and stuff that Joshy did, where he's just kind of not necessarily saying words or doing like oohs, ahs, yes, and like random little phrases from the track, but in a different context. So like this. Just like random stuff like that just helps fill out the space within the arrangement. Gives you something to kind of latch onto vocal-wise. There's also these like, these are all ad-libs. They're just in different tracks so that I could layer them how I wanted to. But yeah, just like loads of like random little phrases like this. I will rise here. I will rise. Like a nice little... Just kind of little vocal parts here and there which you can use. And then I used a little loop here where we have like this. Just that as like something consistently to have throughout the track. This comes like forward and backward within the mix so that like, you know, it's just got some vocals. Because I'm basically signaling to people pretty early on like, hey, this is a vocal track. You should definitely listen to the whole thing because there's loads of vocals in it. And just people tend to like music with vocals in, even if it's just like ambient textures like that. But I'm kind of using this, I guess, strategically to get people to like listen to the full track and get them familiar with the fact that, hey, there is going to be singing in this, or at least vocals in some capacity. Let's talk about the vocal writing. So this is actually really interesting because first things first, like, writing lyrics is quite difficult, but this song is super catchy because of the way it's structured and intentionally so. However, we didn't really, when we were writing and recording, we didn't really know what we wanted to write about. And honestly, we just typed into ChatGPT, like, hey, write us a song. And if you've ever tried to do that, you probably know straight away that 99% of it is absolute garbage and not usable. But there was one line which was like actually really good. I honestly can't remember what line it was from the song, but it was like that one line, and that started this flow of writing events. And once you've got like a good line, you can think like, okay, what is the story I'm trying to tell? Where do we go from here? And we just kind of like pieced it together into being this track about personal growth, I suppose, and like overcoming a bad past and doing better things, basically. And that was kind of like the vibe we were thinking about whilst writing new lyrics, right? The lyrical structure is also really interesting and intentionally catchy, which I'll tell you about in a second. But like the vibe of the song is meant to basically be about, you know how tomorrow you say you're going to stop drinking or stop smoking or stop doing crack on Tuesday afternoons. I don't know, whatever you say or kid yourself like, I'm going to go to the gym and eat healthy and all that stuff. But tomorrow never comes. Well, this time you're actually going to make do on your promises. And I'm actually living this right now. I've quit vaping. I'm about 5 days in. It absolutely sucks, but it's for the best. And I've said I would do it. And I'm already here. So yeah, there you go. What are you giving up? If anything, maybe this time can be a testament for every time you're thinking about caving, you listen to the song. How about that? Anyway, the lyrics here as well, like in the hook, are really, really important for the catchiness. So we basically hint at the hook the entire length of the track. So if you listen here, so the first time you're going to hear it is here. Oh, let's see. This time. There's like slightly different versions of it throughout the whole track.
Start over again. This time.
So you're basically setting the mood like, hey, this time, and that's like letting people know the hook pretty early on in the track, right? This is in the extended mix, of course. But the way the like main verse and chorus roll into each other is interesting because we basically add more to the hook and give you a bigger context of it. So in the breakdown here, now you get the past the full hook. So, notice how many times we're saying the word this time. We are really drilling the concept of this time into somebody's head. That's what makes something catchy, is repetition, but with variation. Now, that's like actually only half of the hook. But like, notice that every line basically starts with this time with some variation. It's like, this time I will rise on over again, but this time, this like same concept. Then you get the full hook later on in the track, right at the climax, which again is longer. But I'll tell you about where the inspiration comes from in a second. But just take a listen and listen to like what I'm saying. Basically, it's like, this time something, this time something. Variation, something, this time, something. But yeah, that's the structure.
This time I will rise over again. And this time I will find the road.
So you've heard that before. This is the new part.
It's a different state of mind. Leave it all behind.
Now bring it back home.
This time
so yeah, we're really drilling that concept of this time into their head, but like, you know, you start off with a small part of the hook, get so much mileage out of it, giving them more, then you give them a little bit just before the drop in the break, and then finally the full hook, or chorus you could call it. Now, that concept of writing with just repeating the same idea over and over again is just so effective, because I can tell you for a fact, I have played this track in clubs, and I know people have never heard it before. I've seen them like sing along by the end. Like, they know it. They're just like, but this time. And like, so that is testament to like this working. Like, if someone can basically know the hook and sing along at the end of the track, that's a pretty good sign on their first listen. So yeah, really interesting writing style. And actually, you know where I got it from? Frickin' glam rock from from the 80s. They have the catchiest songs ever. If you analyze their vocal and lyrical structure, like, it's honestly art. It's amazing. Just how they do it. So yeah, listen to some glam rock. It will help you write better lyrics. If you found this video useful, please do press like and subscribe. Really helps me out. And if you want to see more stuff like this, then consider joining my school community. It's totally free to join, and we have tons of free courses in there. We've got over 1,000 members who are all producers just like you, so you can learn, network with them. And we also do track feedback calls, so you can send us music, we can listen to it live and tell you what you're doing right, what you need to fix, and basically how to get it release ready, just like this. So yeah, links in the description, go join it now. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.